When you walk down the halls of LAIKA and you enter any set of curtains, what you enter into is always going to be a complete surprise, and it's going to be completely different.
It is absolutely true that every new movie that we make gets that bit more ambitious.
We want to make films that push this medium that we love, animation, that push it in new directions.
And we're moving in directions that stop-motion animation doesn't normally go in.
And so every film demands something new, but everyone's up for the challenge.
We've got a brain trust of brilliant creatives here.
We have people who are sculpting puppets, we have people who are making sets, we have people who are animating all day long.
And I think that's what's cool about this place, is it's this tactile wonderland.
To do it practically in camera is something we try to do as much as possible. But at the same time, we bring cutting-edge technology into the process.
Whether it's science or innovation, it's worth the risk sometimes to go out on a limb.
And with each successive film, we all work and grow as artists.
We really wanted to find a way to push facial animation beyond what we'd ever done before.
And the subtlety and a range of emotion.
You get totally transformed into the story and you forget that you're watching a little 12-inch puppet.
It's hands-on, it's tactile, there's a life to it that most other animation forms don't have anymore. We're a group of really talented artists who want to do it the best that we can.
Here at LAIKA, the energy, the atmosphere just really crackles with that creativity.
We don't have to be limited in the stories that we tell. That's what's exciting about the studio.
It feels like we really are just scratching the surface of what this art form can do. And that's incredibly exciting to me.
You're here alone.
Well, welcome everyone. I'm so happy you were able to join us today. I'm Brian Friso, the director of the museum here, and this has been a long journey to get to this day and I think to this opening weekend for this exhibition. The conversation between LAIKA and the Portland Art Museum started in 2009, actually, when LAIKA featured their film Coraline for the first time, and it was at the Schnitzer Hall, and we had the opening festivities here. And I walked into the room where we had some of the maquettes and the puppets, and I went, oh my goodness, this is an art form that really needs to be featured here at the museum. And since then, it's been a nice discussion we've had with them and a journey through time, and I think with their 10-year anniversary recently, and then the wealth of work and the portfolio that has been developed by this incredible team that you'll hear from has really given us a great opportunity to celebrate this art form. And I say art form because in many ways I believe LAIKA distinguishes its work through its sense of humanity, the ability to really show the imperfection, but also have storytelling that takes us on a journey that really reflects, I think, what it means to live today in the 21st century. So it's very special for us to feature this exhibition. Also, it's an opportunity for this museum, and I've said it before, to really embrace the creative energy of our community. Oregon, Portland, the region. This museum is really about celebrating who we are as Oregonians and people who live in the Northwest, and I can't think of a better creative force than LAIKA to emphasize that and to reveal that to the world. We have a mission of bringing the world to Oregon, but also Oregon to the world, and I think this exhibition does that in a very beautiful way. It's also a great opportunity for us to reflect on the museum's Northwest Film Center. It's an important entity that was founded in 1971. The Film Center has really galvanized the film community and also created something very, very special. Personally, I'm very grateful to Bill Foster, the director who's led that for over 40 years. So a big thanks to Bill and the Northwest Film Center and his entire team. They work tirelessly on behalf of this community and this institution. I also want to give a very special thanks. You saw Travis Knight. Travis, obviously a leader of this, but also a number of people on his team. And there's too many to name, but there's a few that I interacted with specifically, and in particular, the new CFO, Brad Wald. Rosemary Colliver has been a great advocate. Mark Shapiro, I think many of you know him. Dan Pascal and Martin Pelham both have given me and my museum great guidance, so a big thanks to them. And then Optimist was the designer of the exhibition. I think if many of you have been through it, you really took advantage of what it means to be in an art museum, celebrating this beautiful art form, the craft, and I think they delivered in a very articulate way to show the beauty of the art that we are all experiencing through these films. On my team, there's Don Urquhart, Matthew Juniper, and Michael Smith, who again partnered with what we're calling the dream team of installation conceptual ideas, because this exhibition at this scale has never been done before, so we really needed to start thinking deeply about bringing it to life, and I think they've done it beautifully. We also have a number of sponsors. You know, this museum is privately supported for the public good, and every dollar counts. And I owe a big thanks to Phil and Penny Knight, who are our lead sponsors. We also have a number of exhibition supporters listed on the wall, all very important. I think you saw some lists before, but I want to call out a few more. In particular, Helen Jo and Bill Witzel, both of those trustees of this museum, Ameriprise Financial and Columbia Threadneedle, the Clark Foundation, KinderCare, also very important, Stoll Reeves, U.S. Bank, and U.S. Bank Foundation, all contributed to this exhibition in particular. A big thanks to them. Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our moderator, who also served as my curatorial advisor for this project, and that's Rose Bond. Rose is an associate professor and lead faculty member in animated arts at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. She has been internationally recognized for her monumental content-driven animated installations, which have illuminated urban spaces in Portland, Zagreb, Toronto, Exeter, UK, Utrecht, Netherlands, and New York City, among others. Rose's animated films have been presented in major international film centers, including in Annecy, Ottawa, Hiroshima, Sundance, and New York, and her work is held at the MoMA Film Collection in their collection archives. In 2016, Rose was awarded the Oregon Media Arts Fellowship and premiered a new multi-channeled projection for the Oregon Symphony in association with Messiaen's Turangalila. It was a wonderful display of her craft and in remarkable artistry. I hope some of you were able to see it. She received her MFA in experimental filmmaking from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and as I mentioned, she has served beautifully as our curatorial advisor for this exhibition. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome Rose Bond to the stage. Thank you.
I'm glad to see you all here. How many people here have seen the exhibition? Just raise your hand. Yeah, a lot of you. Okay. It is my pleasure to be here at this first conversation, so keep your eyes out. There's going to be other opportunities to engage with the artists of LAIKA as this show stays on at Portland Art Museum. But right now, I'd like to just bring up the animators, crafts people, technical wonders from LAIKA. Yeah, welcome them. All right. So we'll start. Here's how it's going to go. I'm going to do a really brief introduction, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions. But really, we want to open this thing up. So your questions, we know that we've probably got some ultra fans here, and we have some very knowledgeable people in Portland about animation, and specifically about stop motion animation. Portland is on the map. As an animator myself, I know that most people, when I go to festivals, whatever, when they talk about stop motion, they're talking about Bristol or Portland. So how did we get here? So hopefully a lot of that will be revealed. The show is extraordinary. And I feel so privileged to have been involved and to have offered what I can to place this work in a larger cultural and artistic place. So, to begin with, I want to introduce Ollie Jones at the far end there. Ollie is the animation rigging supervisor. He's headed up the rigging on all of LAIKA's features. He earned his master in art degree from the famed animation department at the Royal College of Art. Yes. And recently, oh, we got some RCA fans, good. Recently, Ollie was nominated for an Oscar in visual effects for his work on Kubo and the Two Strings, so welcome. Deborah Cook, costume designer.
Hiya.
Yeah. Yeah, all right. You see that, right? You see that. Deb has been around since LAIKA's beginning and has been a key player on all 4 feature films. She credits her fine art sculpture background at London's Central St. Martin as providing her with the opportunity to innovate in uncharted creative waters, which is, I think, where LAIKA finds itself most of the time. So, really happy to have you here, Deb. Brian McLean comes with a background in sculpture. He's been riding, I don't know if that's the right word. Do you ride the leading edge, or it's sort of like, I don't know the metaphor, because it seems like he's leading the wave in 3D printing or rapid prototyping. He joined LAIKA for Coraline, and he's been instrumental in developing the kind of facial animation, and you see his work and the work of others shining on that wall of faces. All right. Georgina, creative supervisor and head of puppet fabrication, has been a key player at LAIKA from the start. She hails from the UK. You're going to hear a lot of British accents. Remember what I said? Bristol, Portland, okay, London. She came with a lot of experience in London from shorts, commercials. She worked for McKinnon and Saunders, which is a kind of a premier puppet company. Also worked in features, including my favorite, Mars Attack and The Corpse Bride, before coming to Portland and being a mainstay at LAIKA. And finally, Brad Schiff. Brad is the animation supervisor on Kubo, Box Trolls, and Paranorman. However, for those people who've been around for a while, Brad cut his teeth here on PJs and Gary and Mike. Remember that? Yeah, let's hear it. All right. And maybe we'll hear a little bit more about that, but he's animated on just about every Oscar nominated feature, from Corpse Bride to Coraline to Fantastic Mr. Fox. And just so you know, to do the animation for Kubo, there were 70 sets. That's 70 sets. How do you supervise that? Whoa. All right. So let's begin. I'm not quite sure where to start. So I'm going to just shuffle these cards. Okay, Brad. Yeah. All right. LAIKA has a massive warehouse. And by the way, it's so nondescript that you would never, ever know where it is in Hillsborough. But it does have those 70 sets for Kubo. So talk to us a little bit about what does it mean to be like an animation supervisor, and maybe just sort of specifically, what are the challenges involved in that?
Oh my gosh, it's the building. It's a totally unassuming building in the middle of Hillsborough. There's no signs, no anything. It's just a big, box. and it's massive, and the whole place is filled with sets, and each set is divided by big black curtains. And for each one of these films, we have a team of 35 animators at its peak, and we try to get each animator a bounce unit. So to be as efficient as we can, we try to get that animator that's shooting, and when they finish that shot, while they're waiting, instead of sitting around waiting for the camera to be moved, for the set to be redressed, they'll jump over and they'll animate on another set. And you know, the biggest challenge, I think, always when you're animating something of this, or supervising something of this scope, is, you know, you have 35 different animators, and the real trick is to try to make sure that it feels like it comes from one set of hands. And I think that that's always the, you know, the hardest part.
Yeah, great. Ollie, I'm going to jump down to you. And again, these are sort of warm-up questions. So you're the rigger. Okay.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, how did your background at RCA, which is kind of known as like a fine art animation program, how did that play into like where you ended up and what you do at LAIKA now?
Well, there was, when we was at the RCA, there was two people that were studying stop motion. One of them was myself, and the other one was Malcolm Lamont, and we both ended up at LAIKA. Okay. So there's a pretty good thoroughbred just there. And what we were really trying to do, he was in one room and I was in the next unit, much like the same way that Brad was talking about. We just had a curtain between us. And he was concentrating on character animation, and I was doing more kind of special effects stuff, more kind of mechanical, making sets, and I was comping characters into those sets. So there was like a definite lineage between what I was trying to do, or trying being the main word there, trying to do at college, and then something that we was eventually doing in the studio as well. So it's, you know, animation, just so you know, animating rigging is, these guys, they can stand up on their own, but they can't leap, they can't jump. We have to hold them up mechanically in space. So we build the apparatus that holds them and pushes them through space, and the animator is then using a series of winders or gears to float the animators around. So we're kind of like an old-fashioned kind of special effects department.
Yeah, old-fashioned, but also really real objects and not just digital. Yeah.
Yeah, real objects, real things, real tactile. So it's, you know, it's an engineering-based medium.
I'm going to move on to you, Deborah. You also list on your bio that you have a fine art background and graduated in sculpture. And you talk about something about that background prepared you. I mean, let's face it. Who gets prepared to knit a tiny sweater?
I think, so I went to St. Martin's and I did sculpture, but it was also in the same building where the fashion degree was happening. So also fine art painting and film. So all of those disciplines played into the kind of work and the access that I had to be creative. So I built a lot of installation work around abstract figurative work and costume pieces that I put myself in. So I was building environments around costume work that was full scale, but also had a lot of detailed elements that involved other mediums, like attaching photos using film, some aspirational stop frame work that I didn't actually realize what I was doing at the time, and that's even existed when I was trying to create those pieces of work. So learning different properties of materials, like working with silicons, working with fabrics, working with upholstery even, and abstracting figurative work really helps give me the basis to learn all of those materials. It eventually just led me here.
Great. I'm going to follow up on Georgina. I'm going to not call you George. The animation, I think, if you look at the long scope of it, that there are certain eras, there are certain studios that kind of come into their own. And I'm thinking, you know, back to the Zagreb School, or I think of George Pal and the Puppetoons, or I think of Jiri Trinka and the sort of that Eastern European kind of whatever. And then, of course, in the UK, I think of Aardman. I remember going to Annecy and seeing, they always have, like, they have the films, they have the features, but they have the adverts, the advertisements. And I remember seeing, like, most of these, what we call commercials here, so many of them at that time, I think this was the 90s or whatever, were done in the UK, and they were stop motion. Could you talk a little bit about sort of what grows that fertile ground? What makes a place be so open, and maybe where you see Portland in that now? It's a big question.
Wow, I got a big question. You know, I think I was involved in a lot of those commercials in the 90s. I worked for McKinnon & Saunders, that was a sort of leading house in specifically puppet making for, you know, we were working for many different agencies and filmmaking companies and short film sort of studios and kids TV. So, and I think a lot of the sort of the openness and tradition of stop motion animation in England actually comes from the children's television, telling stories to kids and educating kids from an early age. BBC television was a leading force in telling wonderful preschool sort of showing sort of education through stop motion animation and telling great stories. So from that hub of, I mean, you know, Britain is very art-based as well. There's a tradition in the British Isles that goes back for millions of years of telling history through art, drawing, creating a sort of a learning technique through visual communication. And I think, you know, telling stories and educating through stop motion animation is just the modern day stepping into, you know, taking that historical thread and telling a great story. So we, you know, that's, I think, we definitely excelled in Great Britain with stop motion, kids TV, commercials, and then a lot of feature work came our way as well, because we had such a consistent flow of sort of actually making really high-end stop-motion films and everything, that we were asked to sort of become a part of some of these larger projects across the world. Now, it's interesting, because when I was at Cosgrove Hall and McKinnon & Saunders, I heard about what was going on in Portland, Oregon. I didn't even know where Portland, Oregon was at the time, but I heard that there was the same sort of traditional art form being used to sort of tell stories in experimental and literal animated ways. And, you know, it was interesting because we got to work for Vinton's studio way back there 20 years ago, making some head mechanics for a show that Brad probably animated on. And, you know, coming to Portland, I recognized Portland's very open to the arts. It's such a creative city. Oregon itself is such an inspiring, you know, the country here, I get inspired every day. So the fact that we make beautiful visual sort of, we tell stories through a visual way does not surprise me. And it's amazing because it kind of reminds me sometimes of home in a weird way being here. So yeah, I think both you know, England as a whole and Portland, Oregon, we found this visual storytelling sort of art form, and we've stuck with it, and we've created really thriving industries through it. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. I think it is. I mean, that whole idea of sticking with it. It's like you all have like worked together for a long time. And it's like, there's something going right when you can keep like a core of creatives working together. And they seem fairly happy, right?
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, we love each other.
Okay. Brian, I want to just, I keep hearing different numbers on this, but one of the things that I heard the other day was 1 million expressions.
Oh man.
It's like, okay.
That's not of Brian, that's of the puppets,
I have
right?
like 4.
Yeah, he has 4. I just want to know a little bit about, and I know that you've probably said this, but probably everyone hasn't heard this, just like, how do you manage that for animators? And then the other question is, how do you decide what expressions
Okay. Well, I'm known as the one who talks a lot, so buckle your seats. Sorry, this is going to be a long explanation. So yeah, for each one of our films, we continue to advance how many facial expressions each character can do. And you probably have heard the number, it's well in the millions for some of our lead characters. Now, we don't actually produce millions of faces. What we do is we produce thousands of eyebrow shapes and we produce thousands of mouth shapes. And they're printed as two separate objects. And the animator has the ability to swap them out independently. So when you multiply the eyebrow shapes by the mouth shapes, you get, I think Kubo had something like 54 million possible facial expressions. So now we didn't, again, print 54 million faces. But each face on the back has a very unique number stamped on the back. And that number tells the animator what expression that is and what frame that needs to go on for the film. To me, it looks a little bit like alphabet soup. I don't know how the animators know exactly what they're reading, but there's some indications of what that expression is. And in years past on Coraline, we were really just focused on animators being able to pick mouth shapes that made it look like she was saying a line of dialogue. So it was all about making sure that we had the correct phonemes. And the phoneme is an expression that your mouth makes to say syllables and vowels, T's, V's, S's. And if you take those base building blocks of phonemes, you can put them in different orders and a character can look like they're saying any line. But over the course of our movies, we've continued to try to add more and more expressivity into these emotional, or into these faces. So that's why we've ended up producing so many thousands of faces and so many millions of faces.
Great, thank you. Ollie, I'm going to come back to you again in terms of the subtlety that Brian was talking about. You also work on visual effects, and you just got an Oscar nomination for the visual effects for Kubo, actually, yeah. So talk to me a little bit. I was watching Paranorman again last night, and I saw some of the special effects, and to me it looked like they were like drawn or something. It had a different quality. Can you talk a little bit about what makes visual effects different at LAIKA from what we usually see from Hollywood?
So yeah, we have a really great visual effects team. So there's a lot of digital work that goes into our movies. Some of it is expanding the horizon, making our worlds bigger. Some of it is digital extension of characters. We have background characters that are digital. And then some of them are things like, our explosions, our smoke effects, some of our water, that's digital too. But instead of taking reality as the touchstone, the digital team takes what we produce in the studio as the starting point for all their work. So what we do is create kind of mechanisms and prototypes and dioramas that the digital team can then use as either influence or a straight copy and turn into a digital version to work across the movie. So for things like in Kubo, for the waves, we produced like 5 or 6 different working prototypes of paper that looked like waves, or we produced a kind of like a spidery kind of mechanism that pushed an undulated black saran wrap and things like that. So we're always trying to go back to the tactile. It always comes back to the stop motion, even when it ends up being a digital asset in the end.
Okay. Yeah.
May I?
Yeah,
one of the cool things with Paranorman was Ollie, so the cloud, the clouds were all, ultimately digital, but they started off practically. So one of the elements that kind of runs through the film is bridal veil, sort of tool material. And Ollie had made this big wheel of clouds that we animated on set to see what kind of, if we could do the clouds practically. And they were great, and with the light going through them, we could see what they looked like practically, and they looked beautiful. But the problem was, as we animated them, they popped around a little bit. So we were able to give that to the visual effects department across the street, and they were able to copy that tool-looking material, but they were able to get all the vaporous qualities of clouds that we couldn't get on stage. So it had the feeling of that tactility, of stop motion, but being done on the computer.
And something that as well with Aggie, there was a lot of drawn version for the electricity that was in the hair and stuff like that eventually becomes CG. And Brian, maybe you could talk a little bit like Aggie, how she was a kind of a hybrid character in a sense, and that was her first.
Yeah, Aggie was a unique character because a lot of her kinetic energy around her was all being done based off of blown ink drawings. So it did have a very 2D feel, but that was put on with the visual effects department. But her faces, as you guys, for those of you who've gone around the exhibit, you'll see there's a sampling of her faces that were 3D printed, and we printed all the faces for that particular, for those sequences, and we would project light through the back. And this was the first time we were actually not only animating the outside of the face, and how, as she's screaming and changing facial expressions, we were also animating the thickness of that material. So as the light was projecting through it, you got this great sense of kinetic energy and power.
Yeah, wow. It's really great for you guys to just chime in on this, okay? Because this, it really shows, you know, it's like, it's not just one department, that you all are talking to each other and sharing like the innovation and sparking off each other.
No, I was just about to say, yeah, the whole sense of puppetry. You know, George actually makes the puppets, but there's Brad, team that's animating the puppets, and we're rigging the puppets. So it's like this whole thing, and it's a real dialogue.
Yeah, we couldn't do it without anybody else around us, basically.
Nobody could do their job without the other.
Yeah.
But that gets back to that, like, I feel like there's this core of people that are working. There's a couple of ways to go here, but Deb, I want to get you back in on it. In Kubo, you do research on all the films on costuming and whatnot, but I think the Kubo took you especially into Japanese culture. There's a term that wabi-sabi, is that how you say it? Anyway,
I wouldn't like to comment on the pronunciation.
Okay, it's in the PR materials, but they're talking about this beauty in imperfection. So what I want to just ask you to talk about just a little bit is you're making, and have you guys seen this? Have you seen the panels where you see like the fabrics? It's like what Brian was saying. You can't just go to the store and buy a pair of denim jeans and cut it up, because the scale is going to expose that, and it's going to look like a big burlap bag that they use silk. So figuring out what these materials are, but the other thing is that they look so exquisite, and yet it's got to be so durable. It's like months on a set with hands all over it. So how do you get to that? You know, it's sort of like perfect but really imperfect.
I guess there is a lot of research, not just about the history of the culture, especially in Kubo, but a lot of research goes into the kind of fabrics that we can use. As you were saying, some off-the-shelf fabrics are bought in our first two films for Coraline and Paranorman, and we did use those more, and they were just customized. But as we've moved forward with Box Trolls and Kubo, we've got more into engineering our own fabrics that are specifically for our use. So the properties that we need, that we could hunt forever in an off-the-shelf fabric that we would never find, we are now trying to build those for ourselves with new techniques and engineering. Some of the things that are used across the board in other departments, but also unique ones just to costume. So they're invested with that movability and property that we need just for animation. So we've moved forward from using realistic fabrics to, for example, an egg sweater. It used the line work of the movie's artwork to look like a knitted sweater. So that was actually achieved by using different weight threads, dyed different shades of green, on a very stretchy backing, and we might look at maybe 20 or 30 different backings to find the right property, and then creating the line work from the thread and the stitching. So it looks like a sweater, and if you see it in the exhibition, it looks like a sweater, but in comparison to the one for Coraline, it's a very, very different beast, and that's the evolvement that we've taken, the line we've been able to take with the success of the films is really given us a platform to be able to work more specifically for animation.
I think what's always really difficult for what Deborah's team has got to do, they've got to attain what is a look and a style, but they've also got to get it to perform, and it's got to be animatable. And there's like with Kubo's sleeves, I remember Brad, you having a pretty good story about how difficult that was to achieve and what you had to do to get there.
Yeah, I remember I had a lot of sleepless nights about that kimono before we hit stage. We had numerous versions, and Debs and her team were creating versions of the costume, and they were beautiful and they moved elegantly, but there were some things with it. The sleeves were wired, and with a team of 35 animators, ultimately, it needed to do the same thing. And when Kubo put his arms by his side, there was wire around the cuff, and you'd have to sculpt it. You'd have to bend the sleeves to do a particular shape, and the odds of all 35 doing the same thing, it wasn't great. So I went to Debs, and we started a dialogue, and we started talking, and I thought, it would be great if every time he put his arms down, it did the same thing. And Debs had a terrific idea. Origami is a theme throughout the film, and she thought, what if we took more of an origami approach to the costume and created this prototype, which changed everything. And it was exactly what we wound up doing, and it was amazing. Yeah.
It was a perfect form follows function kind of.
Yeah, it took a lot of engineering to get there, didn't it? Can't tell you how many versions we did, piles and piles of them, but it got there in the end, and the things that you end up using are actually quite simple. They're all familiar materials. It's just, again, it's knowing the properties and the combinations of them. So we went through many, many different iterations, and the one that ended up being the most elegant actually had the most simple solution, but it's just getting there. And again, for the amount of duplication that we need to do, if we need to do 30 or 35 costumes, finding a way of doing that, you do an awful lot of research and a lot of playing around, but it's the edit at the end that really counts, that makes it that elegant and that simple looking.
It's interesting as well, because while this is going on, this narrative is going on around, we're trying to build the puppet.
That's what I was going to ask you. Where are you? I mean,
well, exactly. No, we're as the puppet building team, we're making the skeleton, the body that goes inside the costume, and you can't have a costume on a puppet that's not connected. So all of these decisions are affecting the build of the internal skeleton, which we call an armature. So the armature, essentially you almost need the costume sort of as a finished piece to inform you as to how you're going to build the armature, but that's not the way it works. You've got to be. No. So we're doing a lot of tests, and basically what Debs and Brad are doing are informing us what we have to add on to the armature, because these things have to be controllable.
Yeah, and a perfect example of that with Kubo, because there's a reason you've never seen baggy clothes in a stop motion film before, because it's a nightmare. And
along with hair and fur
my gosh.
and a few other things.
So with Kubo, he had these baggy sleeves, and when his arms went to his side, or when they stuck out, the top of the sleeve just stuck up off the top of his arm, and it didn't give it real world weight. So we got together with George, and ultimately what they wound up doing was putting an extra joint on that was attached to essentially the tricep of the character, and so it came off off Kubo's arm, traveled down the sleeve, and connected to the front of the sleeve. So you could pull it down and give it real world weight, make it feel like real world weight when his arm was to his side or sticking out in front of him.
It's funny. He says a little join and some wire. We actually, I wish it was that simple.
Super easy.
We ended up. Have you guys seen those angle point lamps? That's actually a sort of a bendy. It's called gooseneck because it looks like a goose's neck, but
or like
made
a microphone stand.
Yeah, like your
exactly.
IKEA lamp or something.
Yeah. So we realized that the animators need more control than just a wire, and a wire's going to break. So we actually found miniaturized gooseneck, which we then attached to the joint so that it could have more control for Brad's team and always stay in the position the animator put it rather than springing back up.
It's interesting to sit back and look at all of the technology that we've used over the course of our movies. And we sit here oftentimes and talk about, we came up with this great technical solution or that great technical solution. But so much of those technical solutions are absolutely driven by the creative needs for the film. And it's fun to sort of look back and say, oh, why did we choose that technology? Because we needed to figure out a way to make the character perform like this, or we needed to figure out a way to make the character look like this. And that's the fun thing about LAIKA is each one of our characters is unique. Each one of our characters has probably at least a dozen little inventions that we've had to figure out along the way, some even more than that to make them work. So that's the fun thing. I think we do talk about technology that we use, but it's so much is driven by the creative.
Yeah, I'll aim this at you too here, but anybody else can jump in. Let's talk a little bit about aesthetic choices. You're talking about the film is calling for, I guess there's another way of saying that, as possibly an aesthetic choice. I'm thinking of the 3D printing, and I'm thinking of puppets. Georgina, puppets are sort of inherently stiff. And you guys have this squash and stretch quality that comes out. But I want to talk about the facial expressions and the 3D rapid prototyping. There are choices that are made there. I think when you think back of Jiri Trinka and the hand, that puppet face has hardly any, not a lot of expressions. Animalisa, which was recently out, made a decision. They're using replacement parts, but they kept the seam. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys went through to come to these aesthetic choices?
Sure. So we, back on Coraline over 11 years ago, we made a decision to try and take this 100-year-old technique of replacement animation and try to fuse it with 21st century 3D printing technology. And at the time, we were the first studio to ever do this. And the idea was simple. We were going to take something that used to be hand sculpted. I don't know how many of you guys have seen the film Nightmare Before Christmas, but Jack Skellington is a perfect example of a replacement animated character where he had 800 hand sculpted faces that were reused over and over again for that film. For our film Coraline, we knew that we wanted Coraline to have a huge emotional range. We needed her to be able to be very subtle and tender in certain moments and really scared at others. So replacement animation gives you the best of both worlds. And we didn't know how we were going to hire a team of so many sculptors to do this, which is why we came up with this idea of 3D printing. So by 3D printing, we were able to harness the power and the subtlety of a computer, because basically we're animating in the computer, just the faces, and then we're sending that facial geometry to a 3D printer that produces them as a physical object. So LAIKA's desire is to constantly try to find ways that we can make our characters perform in ways that stop motion has never been able to achieve before. And that's from the rigging to the costumes to the armature to the way the animators breathe life into them. So everything about our style is to try to come up with really naturalistic styles that are redefining what people think of as stop motion. And that is that's very true in the faces. There's definitely a lot of emphasis on performance. There's a lot of emphasis on acting. So we will present different facial performances to the director. In CG, they're just seeing a little floating head talk, and they'll go back and give very specific notes on, we want that character to know. A few frames earlier, we want him to sneer, or we want him to get really sad and start to feel like he's going to well up. And for the first time in stop motion, we have the ability to go back in and bake those performances into the 3D printed parts. But to answer your question about the line, this is a funny story. On Coraline, I told you guys I talked a lot. On Coraline, we had bisected the face in the top and the bottom, and Henry Selick, who was the director of Coraline, wasn't sure if he wanted to delete that line, if he wanted to have that seam line erased. So he put out a vote to the crew and asked them to vote on whether or not we should remove the line. And he got all these responses back, and one of the best responses was, I think we should leave the line because the name of the movie is Coraline, after all. We did decide to erase the line. Normally one of these guys does a little drum roll at that, but they were out of sync this time.
We've heard it too many times, Brian.
Some of these guys have already heard me say that once today.
What I find amazing about what Brian's team is doing is that you were saying riding on the wave or something of rapid prototyping, but really they're trailblazing, because they're always trying to do something that the technology isn't quite up to speed with. And so you take something like Coraline, where you used to you're painting every face independently and then putting a freckle on and things like that. And I just think maybe you talk about like how the process of and the technology is caught up with our desires.
Yeah, so on Coraline, we had to hand paint every single freckle, every single lip, every single eyebrow. It was really laborious, so we had really broken through with this amazing performance potential, but we were constantly needing to go back to the director and negotiate with them of how much detail they could put into the paint on a character's face. So starting on Paranorman, we decided that we were going to take this really successful process and this successful technology and basically throw it out the window and put all of our eggs in this basket of new color 3D printing. And there was only one color 3D printer on the market. So we literally were hedging our bets on an untested technology. And to Ollie's point, these 3D printers were designed to make prototypes. They were designed to produce something that looked somewhat decent, that ultimately that part was going to end up being produced out of plastic or out of rubber and manufactured somewhere else in the world. So they were really just there as a prototyping machine. But what we were trying to do is we were trying to make them our final product. So we were demanding that these machines found these crazy colors that the manufacturer said wasn't possible for them. This is outside the printer's gamut. And I think it was a lot of being naive, a lot of us just trying to hammer these machines to do things that they didn't think possible that allowed us to suddenly stumble across some things. And looking back on it, if we had approached it differently, if we had approached it more scientifically, we would have gotten bogged down in the weeds. But because we were going very specifically for this creative look, we just continued to, if we wanted that particular red, we just started throwing all these different colors at the machine. And finally we got a red, and it actually was orange on the computer screen, but it prints red, so great, we'll go that way.
Yeah, and I think we all applaud Brian as well, because like on Paranorman, when we did the shift from the resin printer to the color powder printer, it did not work. Like it was not, those faces were not working. And I'm sure there were a lot of stress, the sleepless nights for Brian as we got, and I remember that first test, that first Neil test that we did, and it was cool because Coraline had, 6 freckles on each side that could all be hand painted. And then you had Neil that had hundreds of freckles on each side of his face. But I remember that first test that worked, and it looked terrible. No, the first one that worked was great.
That's the thing about LAIKA is that we are given so much freedom to try and fail. And we've all talked about, Deb's 30 different fabrics or 30 different costume or liners. 29 of them had to fail before we found the one that works. And I think that back on so many of these things, if we had the producer or the directors banging on our office doors saying, how's it going, is it fixed yet, or is it figured out yet, we would not be nearly as successful. They give us the opportunity, they let us work together, and they sit back, and I think they're probably having sleepless nights hoping that we're going to figure it out.
Yeah, this is great. This is my last question. I want to end up with you, Brad, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Based on what you were saying, and thank you, Ollie, for opening that up, and thank you, Brian. It's this thing that you're given this opportunity here, but being around Portland for a long time, I think there's a feeling in town among the animators that you could do whatever, you could take a lot of risks, and you could take a form of animation maybe that hadn't really been used in a sort of professional or high caliber way and try to bring that. You've been in Portland for a while. What makes, partly it's LAIKA itself. Is there anything though from the city, the community, the place that it is that also supports that idea of, and makes it different than Hollywood, I guess?
What we do is very special Portland itself is a very artistic city. It has a great art community here, and I think there's a demeanor to the city which is I don't want to say laid back, but it allows artists to be artists without that aggressive, competitive edge that Los Angeles or Hollywood has. And I think that I moved here in '98 to work at Will Vinton Studios to work on the PJs. And even back then, there's almost like a support from the city, like a confidence that you get just from being here, just an inherent comfortableness of being able to take chances, of being able to do things different, and it's been that way from when it was, you know, from when it was Wolverton Studios to when it was, you know, to now at LAIKA, and it's nice, and we can do things without the pressure of Hollywood, without the pressure of, you know, aggressive. You got to get it done. You got to get it done, and it's, I don't know, it's special. It's hard to put it, you know, to verbalize it into words.
And yet you're getting the Oscar nominations right up there.
Yeah. It's the word LAIKA is Russian for little barker or noise from an unexpected place. So even that idea of us being up in Portland, Oregon, and making an impact, at least I think that's true. Somebody can verify that. Yeah.
That's a good story. I like that one.
I think independence is like a really strong part of what we do. Independence as a studio, or independent is like in terms of making stop motion is on the outside of and looking in, and also just being in Portland as well. Just, you know, there's, you know, people riding around on 6-foot, you know, unicycles. There's a lot of independence here as well. So I think there's a lot of synergy with the studio and the city.
Bikes, yeah. Okay, let's open it up. Thank you, guys.
Hearing you say Corpse Bride, I remember watching that and just being blown away by the cape and like learning about it. It's like your industry has heart, and there's not a lot of heart in other places that I see, and you can feel the love resonating off these characters that you guys are producing. And I just want you to know that I feel it. It's like Jim Henson, but way more like in-tuned. And I just want you guys to know it really touches my heart a lot, and it brings my inner child a lot of happiness.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And a little question. The faces on the sisters, why do they carry masks? And why do they have masks on their faces? I mean, their faces are beautiful when they take them off. There's like some scars, but maybe there was something I missed when I watched that movie, but I was just thinking.
Yeah, I don't think you ever see their full faces. I think the masks were giving it a very spooky element. And they were there in the early character design. And I was very excited because, great, we don't need to make faces for that character. You never see any facial animation.
My painters were very excited because they painted those masks. And it was actually based on a traditional art form, Japanese art form, which, Debs, you might want to talk.
No theatre masks, ancient Japanese no theatre. And they're very haunting and very ghost-like, and that's why they were selected for those characters. And the fact that their mouths don't move, but the voices come out, is very, very eerie and quite unusual for stop frame as well, after the efforts Bryant goes to make for
I've been pitching a character that talks and the mouth doesn't move for films now.
I know, we were so excited about it. It goes against everything we do typically.
It's interesting. Sorry, Brian. They're my favourite puppets ever made. And their faces don't. But the power that emits from those characters, those two sisters, when I see them on the screen, I'm hiding behind my sofa. You know, they're so intimidating because we're so used to a human face moving and communicating even through your eyes, and these things just nothing.
Thank you all so much for what you do. These are instant classics. They are in our home. I know they are for so many. I've always wondered, has this ever happened? You get to the end of making a movie, you all sit down, you all watch it, and somebody goes, I really want to reshoot that one scene because the sleeve or the face, or like if we shot it from this side, wouldn't it be great? And if that happens, do you all say, I'm really sorry, I'm done with our contract? Or do you actually have to reset things up?
I mean, I think it's, when we're done with each project, we have an opportunity. So, you know, the shooting schedule is over. We'll go through, like I know I'll go through, and, you know, we always try to do a certain amount of reshoots. You know, typically, for me, I'll look through things that are performance-based, things that sort of remind me, that take me out of the movie because it reminds me that I'm watching a puppet, and it pulls me out of the story. The director will look at it from a different reason. The producer will look at it from a different reason, and they compare those notes. Ultimately, it's the director's call which shots we reshoot, but there's always a chunk of 8 to 20 reshoots that we wind up doing. But once those are done, I think we all feel very good with the final product, and then try to grow on the next one, you know, style-wise.
And the way that it's set up at our studio is there's before you get to shoot a shot, there's a block through of that shot. There's a rehearsal of that shot. So it's all about trying to get everything in place and make those decisions or changes of mind before you actually get to shooting the shot for real. So because it's a very time-consuming, process to have to reshoot. So
go ahead, Ollie.
I was just going to say, I think it's a time-based medium, and there is a kind of theatre to it, and the animators are our actors, and I think that's where a lot of the love comes from, is that we don't massage the love out of it. We don't, identify every pixel that's wrong with it. We let the kind of the beauty
it's
of the...
definitely embracing the imperfections.
Imperfections
and,
stand.
Yeah. I see some costume elements sometimes, and I just think, God.
Yeah, we all have that, but it's in
we
service
can all
of
list
the...
them.
Yeah, there are always things.
Yeah.
I like doing Lego stop motion animation because it's really easy to do, and there's all the facial expressions already laid out. And me and my brother like doing Lego animation, and he's not here right now because he's sick. But I was just wondering, would you recommend clay animation over Lego animation? Or which one do you think is easier?
You can do that.
It's not easy.
It's not. I'm not an animator, but I grew up absolutely in love with claymation. That was what got me into this business, and also taught me that I'm not an animator. I don't have the patience to do it. So that's why I like replacement animation, because you can just take something that's already animated and stick it on, and it looks great. So I'll kick that over to Brad, because you've done both.
Yeah, I've done both. I did clay animations as a kid and in school, and didn't even think to do. But we didn't have the little Lego guys when I was a
Not
kid.
that old.
In the old days.
Well, we didn't have the little
No,
Lego
we didn't.
guys. We had Lego, we had the blocks, but we didn't have the guys. And it depends what you want to do. I think the Legos are awesome, and I think if you want to do something with a clay character, if you want to get it, try to manipulate a character to look like it's talking or turning from a person into a monster, or clay's a fun thing to toy around with, and I encourage you to do both of them.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Do it both in shot.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of it, That's how we think about things. We're not kind of limited by either or. We have to take every kind of little moment and we mix it all up and
That's
put
how
in.
you make something new.
Yeah.
It's innovation.
And a little trick of the trade, if you're doing some clay animation, don't be afraid to put a little wire skeleton inside it to hold the clay up, because the clay might start to sag of its own accord, and all the animators put little armatures inside their clay. So top tip.
Thanks for being here and offering so much awesome wisdom and knowledge. It's really cool kind of seeing you guys have this synergy as you're discussing. It's just amazing. And even though you talk a lot, I really like it, so just so you know. But,
I think that was directed at me, but thanks.
My question's mainly for Georgina, but it's just kind of like what creative supervisor means to you, kind of what that entails, and I guess the second part just being, how do you determine how to divide your attention between departments and your team and keep that collaboration and communication going?
That's a really good question, because I'm glad that we're bringing up the crew around us, because we're sort of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're key people at LAIKA, but it's the crew that make the work that you see out there. And I have an amazing team that grew from initially 25 people when I first started on Coraline to 85 at the on our latest movie. And my job, I see my job as being the conduit of information. I get the ear of the director, the head of animation. I every day can deal with the people you're seeing up on stage here, making sure that I can try and get as much information to the team so that they can do the best job possible. As a creative supervisor, I hardly get to make anymore, which it saddens me, because I made puppets for 20 years, but that knowledge of making puppets for 20 years is what allowed me to basically facilitate my crew with the tools, the information that they need to do their job. And you know, they're superstars, they're artists though, and they are in their comfort zone when they're doing their one little thing at their desk, and at times they forget that they've got to talk to the person next to them or pass the puppet off to the next department. So, you know, it's my job to make sure that they're thinking ahead and they've got the information for the moment in hand. So, and I'm sure everybody else.
Yeah, the rapid prototyping team's about 65 to 70 people, so it's huge, and it's grown from, I think, around 20, 25 on Coraline.
I think there was about 5 costume makers on Coraline. Now there's around 18 fabricators, but we also have a massive support team of coordinators around us as well that create all of that interaction and organize us every day to impart everything we know and help things run smoothly.
And we have about 10 riggers that are servicing kind of, on average, like 3 animators each. So they're part of the on-stage team. So they're working with the cameramen, the set dressers, the animators, and all the stage crew, like ADs and stuff like that. So that's a whole big kind of ensemble.
Hello. So,
Hello.
Hi.
What was the hardest scene to do in Kubo?
Oh, starting here.
Giant skeleton.
Yeah.
The monkey.
Moon Beast.
Yeah, the fight on the boat. You know, they were all hard on Kubo, and I hate to say that but they were. Like any one of these things on Kubo and another film would have been, you know, the thing on that movie to be the hardest thing, and we had 6 of them.
The thing that was really
10.
interesting about walking around this exhibit is seeing the Coraline Garden for the first time in almost a decade and seeing how beautiful that set was, but how scary that set was to build. That was the thing that I think concerned so many people on Kubo or Coraline, is how are we going to build this magic garden? And I feel like every single one of our films has 3 dozen of those.
That's right. Yeah. And the skeleton, it's the skeleton that's in the exhibit is the skeleton that was in the film. And so we had one animator that was on, you know, it was mostly broken in half, so it was cut at the waist, so you'd see the rib cage, it'd have the arms and the head, and it was on a hexapod, which is kind of, it's what you would see on a flight simulator or an amusement park ride. So you could control the twist, the tilt back and forth, the side to side with this jog box, like these dials that were made up. And then an animator is up there on the scaffolding, moving these arms, giant, you know, with his hand. It was nuts. And you know, like normally we're moving things that are, you know, a fraction of a millimeter, and Charles is up there trying to animate this skeleton. And you know, sometimes his movements are this big. He's like, it just doesn't seem right to move it that far. But really, in scale, it was only about this big.
It's funny because in that scene, the skeleton was consistently holding the monkey, which was our biggest challenge, because animators, to start with, when you say a fully furry animal and you're going to animate it, they run out the door. They're like, no, we are not animating fur. So we'd spent all this time overcoming how we were going to make an animatable furry monkey. And then you don't even notice the monkey in the big, huge skeleton's hand. And I don't think Charles even once worried about the fur on the monkey. It was like, oh my God, how am I going to animate this skeleton?
What would be your future dream animation project?
Wow.
Remember, non-disclosure.
It kind of is, yeah.
Wow, you've stunned us all to silence.
I know, we haven't gone into space yet.
I would say something with one room and no dialogue for me. That would be
no dialogue.
Definitely the one room and the one character.
Hi. It's very great for you guys to be here. I'm really thankful. You guys are, I don't want to exaggerate when I say you guys are pretty much a perfect animation studio. You guys have top technology, top artists. I believe you guys contribute to what I believe we're still in the animation renaissance. I have a 2-part question. 1, how do you decide on choosing a story and saying, this is a story that deserves to be told in this animation style and can't be told in other animation styles or in our style? And my second part is that, well, I'm an animator myself. I'm a stop motion animator. I work with clay. What are the really hard parts I'll have to go through? What are the scariest parts of going through it, and how do I go through that? Like whether it's financial things or people, like major audiences not understanding your work.
I mean, do you want to? The first one is it's really story based.
Yeah, it's always story based.
And I don't think there's an aesthetic that we're drawn to, but we don't shy away from what should be a stop motion movie. I mean, remember just like when Henry Selick first started talking about this with us, he would always be like, if it's done like this, we want stop motion, we want it to do that. So we would never shy away from a challenge. We never say, well, that's not really something that we should be doing. And then do you want to take the second half?
Yeah, I think, doing clay animations, doing films, any films for that matter, I think that you're putting yourself out there in a vulnerable place. So you start to do something that you believe in, that you think is cool, that you think is funny, that you think is scary, whatever it happens to be. And it's such a long process, and I can just tell you from my experience in film school and whatnot, I would start these projects that I thought were cool, that I was really into, and it takes so long to do them that about halfway through, you lose all objectivity, and you don't think is this really funny? Is this really something that people are gonna like? I'm never gonna get this done. I remember going through a thing, and I remember calling my mom my second year in grad school, crying, I'm not gonna get this thing done. She goes, you always do that. You always get through this phase, and you always get it done. But I think, it's all very hard, and it's all, it's a risk that I think that we've all taken, that I think is important in growing as an artist and becoming who you want to be as an artist.
And really, I would say, stop motion animation isn't easy in any of our specialized areas, but that is the joy of it as well, because when you overcome a sort of a problem day in, day out, but when you see something come to life on the screen and tell a beautiful story, it's worthwhile. But yeah, it isn't easy every day. And you hit a wall, and you climb over that wall, and you hit another one.
Hi. So at what point in either any of your or individual or sort of mutual career at LAIKA do you look at a project and you not go, oh dear God, what have I done? I'm so in over my head and I'm never gonna finish it. Are you there yet? Or is it we're
always there?
I think
we're
always
there right now.
There's been 4 days when I haven't been there. I think it's been the release of each one of our films.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's sort of. I think those two questions are connected in a way.
There's a lot of sleepless nights, but there's a lot of energy to get up in the morning and go to work and try to solve the problem. It's a good balance of sheer terror and sheer excitement.
All right, I think we'll wrap it up on that note. Let's give a big round of applause and thanks.